My name is Haley Anderson, and I never imagined I would be pouring my heart out here on Reddit for the entire world to see. Yet, here I am, my fingers trembling over the keyboard, trying to find the right words to describe the storm that has engulfed my life. I'm 23 years old, originally from a small suburb outside of Chicago, and for most of my life, I considered myself an average girl next door with big dreams. I was the second of three children, Nat, growing up in a house with squeaky stairs, a cluttered living room filled with mismatched furniture, and a cozy den where our family would gather to watch sitcoms on weeknights. My parents worked hard, my dad as a plumber with his own small business, and my mom juggling part-time administrative work at a local elementary school. We were never rich, never poor, simply balanced on the tightrope of the American middle class. I grew up cherishing the simple things: barbecues in the backyard, a weekend softball game at the local park, or grabbing ice cream with my friends on hot summer evenings. From a young age, I had romantic fantasies shaped by too many rom-coms and heartfelt pop songs on the radio. My older sister Jessica used to laugh at me, telling me that love in the real world was more complicated than the sugar-coated Hollywood versions I devoured. I never believed her. I was the hopeless romantic who wrote silly poems in sparkly notebooks and daydreamed about a high school sweetheart who would whisk me away to a magical future. In high school, I had a couple of boyfriends, brief flings that never quite blossomed into something deep. I always wanted more. More passion, more excitement, more of that fairy tale thunder and lightning love that made life worth living. And so at every turn, I kept searching. I moved away for college, attending a state university in Ohio. It felt liberating to pack my bags, say goodbye to my childhood bedroom, and step into a bigger world. I embraced the typical college experiences, the dorm room mixers, the late-night pizza runs, the endless cups of cheap coffee while pulling all-nighters before midterms. It was in college that I started to refine who I was and who I wanted to become. I found a knack for communications and digital media, which shaped my major, and I found a small but tight-knit group of friends who felt like family. One of them was Amy, my best friend to this day, who would always be the first to comfort me when I cried over heartbreak, and the first to laugh with me over stupid, silly jokes. We bonded over a shared love of musicals and a secret obsession with trashy reality TV, and I can't count how many nights we stayed up binge-watching our favorite shows, ignoring our homework. During my sophomore year, I met Michael Randall. We were both volunteering for a campus event, an orientation for incoming freshmen. He was standing by the sign-up table, wearing a big, bright grin on his face, joking with everyone who passed by. He had an upbeat energy that just drew me in. I remember how he caught my eye, winked playfully, and asked if I could hand him the stack of flyers. It wasn't love at first sight, but there was an instant spark that lit up my insides. He wasn't conventionally handsome in a chiseled magazine cover sort of way, but he had a certain confidence about him. Broad shoulders, dark hair that curled at the ends, and eyes that flickered with good humor. The more we talked, the more I realized he was one of those people who could make anyone feel comfortable. I felt my cheeks warm every time he smiled at me. Our relationship developed in the way so many college romances do. Small steps, casual hangouts, study sessions that turned into late-night confessions. We started dating officially a couple of months after we first met. He was sweet, supportive, and hardworking. Michael was majoring in business administration, dreaming of starting his own venture one day. He adored the fact that I was a dreamer too, albeit in a more artistic and idealistic sense. We would talk for hours about our visions of the future. Me wanting to break into digital marketing, or maybe even public relations in the music industry, and him planning to open a trendy cafe that also doubled as an event space for local artists. Our friends often joked about our synergy, claiming that we were a power couple in the making. College flew by in a whirlwind. We graduated, threw our caps in the air, and soon found ourselves in the real world. With the naive energy of 20-somethings, we believed life would effortlessly fall into place. I landed an entry-level job at a small digital marketing firm in Cleveland, while Michael started working at a corporate office downtown to save money for his dream cafe. We decided to move in together to a modest apartment with peeling wallpaper and questionable plumbing. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. We were serious about each other, so living together felt like a natural step. In those early months of post-college life, everything felt like an adventure. Assembling IKEA furniture at midnight, counting pennies to afford an occasional date night, and hosting potluck gatherings with our fellow broke friends. However, reality has a way of wearing down the rose-colored lens through which you see the world. We worked long hours. My boss, though supportive in some ways, had a knack for piling endless projects on my plate. And Michael spent more time at his office than at home. Our schedules rarely aligned. Date nights became sporadic, replaced by exhausted evenings on the couch, a frozen pizza in the oven, and half-hearted conversation. Some nights I would crash into bed while he was still typing away on his laptop at the kitchen table, the light reflecting off his tired eyes. Other times, he would come home so late that I'd already be asleep. We were both climbing a ladder of some sort, striving to prove ourselves and make ends meet. Despite this grueling routine, I still believed in our love. We'd talk about our future, about saving money to eventually move somewhere warmer. Michael always said he dreamed of relocating to Austin, or maybe even Los Angeles, to open that cafe of his. We promised each other that these hectic schedules were temporary, that one day we'd look back on these times and laugh. There were good moments, of course. Weekend getaways to the lake, silly arguments over who forgot to buy milk, nights when we'd stay up reminiscing about college. But there was also a subtle drifting, a feeling that maybe we weren't as in sync as we used to be. I noticed small changes. Michael seemed more reserved, less inclined to share the details of his day. I caught myself making excuses not to talk about my frustrations, thinking I didn't want to burden him. We were both tired, and sometimes it felt easier to keep our thoughts locked away than to hash them out in a real conversation. The first significant crack in our relationship happened about a year after we started living together. Michael got an opportunity to move on to a new team at his company, one that required even more of his time. Though the pay bump was tempting and the experience invaluable for his long-term goals, he seemed torn about whether to pursue it. I encouraged him, telling him that we could handle the extra distance, the late nights, the weekend calls. Part of me was proud that he was ambitious, proud that he had the courage to push forward. But as the weeks went by, I found myself alone more often. Our communication slipped into short, clipped texts, running late, sorry, or don't wait up, love you. We stopped going on walks together. The spontaneous hugs and kisses we used to share felt replaced by hurried pecks on the cheek. Slowly, our relationship was fraying around the edges. Around this time, I started getting more responsibilities at my own firm. One of our biggest clients was a luxury fashion brand looking to break into new social media campaigns. My boss thrust me into the spotlight, saying it was my chance to prove myself. I started traveling to New York for meetings with the clients, sometimes for days at a time. I should have been thrilled. This was exactly what I'd always wanted, to have a real platform for my creative ideas. But every trip became a reminder of the growing distance between Michael and me. We barely talk on the phone. I tried to share my excitement and stress, but his exhausted voice on the other end sounded preoccupied, like he had more pressing matters to handle. I'll never forget the first time I met James Griffin. It was at a networking event in Manhattan, one of those swanky gatherings where everyone sips cocktails and pretends to be best friends while exchanging business cards. I was feeling out of place, wearing a pair of borrowed heels that pinched my toes, wondering if anyone there actually wanted to talk about real ideas or if it was all about self-promotion. James spotted me by the drinks table, looking a bit awkward, I'm sure. He introduced himself in this confident yet laid-back manner. He was in marketing too, working for a rival agency but specializing in strategic partnerships. He asked about my role, my aspirations, and he actually listened, nodding thoughtfully instead of scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. Over the course of the evening, we found ourselves gravitating toward each other. Our conversation flowed effortlessly. He had a knack for telling jokes that felt genuine instead of forced. He'd grown up in California, graduated from a well-known business school, and somehow found his way to New York. He was about my age, tall and lean, with sandy brown hair that brushed against his forehead in a casual way. I won't lie, there was an instant physical attraction. But I brushed it aside. After all, I was in a committed relationship. Besides, in the marketing world, it's not unusual to meet charismatic people with an air of confidence. Still, something about James stirred a sense of excitement in me. I'd been feeling so stagnant, so caught up in the humdrum routine. The conversation was refreshing. He was witty, direct, and surprisingly vulnerable when he spoke of his own struggles with stepping out of the shadow of bigger, more established colleagues. By the end of the event, we exchanged cards, promising to keep in touch about potential collaborations. I didn't think much of it then. I had no intention of letting it become anything more than a professional connection. But soon after, we started emailing about industry trends, new campaigns, and sometimes about random personal anecdotes too. At first, it was entirely work-related, yet as the weeks passed, our messages became more personal. We joked about the quirks of city life, recommended music to each other, and complained about the stress of big city hustle. I remember how I'd feel a little jolt of excitement whenever I saw his name pop up in my inbox. Looking back, that was probably the moment I should have set boundaries. In my mind, I told myself it was harmless. I was a professional. I was in a relationship. But my heart was hungry for the attention that I wasn't getting at home. And maybe, just maybe, I was drawn to the thrill of something new, something that seemed to promise the adventure I'd been missing. A few months later, our firm and James's agency were both attending a major conference in Los Angeles. The plan was to showcase new marketing strategies, attend workshops, and mingle with potential clients. Michael couldn't come with me. He was neck-deep in his own projects, so I traveled alone. I told Michael it was just work, which wasn't a lie, but I withheld the detail that James would be there too. The first day of the conference was hectic. I was presenting on a panel, and my nerves were shot. When it was over, James found me by one of the booths and congratulated me on a great presentation. I remember how his eyes lit up as he complimented my slides, praising my creativity and the clarity of my ideas. It was the first time in a long while that I felt genuinely seen and appreciated. That evening, a group of us went out for dinner. The conversation flowed smoothly. Marketing gossip, random jokes about strange booth setups at the conference, and commentary on the vibrant Los Angeles nightlife. Eventually, some people drifted back to their hotels, and it ended up just James and me, sitting at a table strewn with half-empty glasses. The city glowed around us, neon lights reflecting on the sidewalks. James started asking about my life beyond work, about my relationship. I was honest, maybe too honest. I told him how Michael and I had been growing distant, how I felt lonely and unfulfilled. He listened intently, nodding in sympathy, his gaze never leaving my face. When I look back on it now, I realize that conversation was the seed of something that would soon spin out of control. James opened up about how he'd never found a relationship that truly clicked. He was perpetually busy, traveling for work, and had never actually lived with a partner. In that moment, with the ambient hum of the restaurant and the remnants of cocktails warming our blood, we both seemed to cling to each other's vulnerability. It was like we were both standing on the edge of a cliff, staring at the risk of falling, and yet unable to step away. That night ended with a lingering hug outside my hotel, a moment that felt heavier and more intimate than it should have. I told myself it was just an emotional connection, just two professionals bonding over shared experiences. But there was an electricity there, an undeniable current that sparked whenever our eyes met. Over the following days, we saw each other frequently at the conference. We exchanged text messages about which sessions we were attending, saved each other seats, grabbed lunch together. Every stolen moment felt like a secret. My heart pounded in my chest in a way I hadn't felt in ages. I was both terrified and exhilarated. On the final night, there was a networking reception at the hotel bar. After an hour of polite schmoozing, we found ourselves alone again, tucked away in a corner with our drinks. At some point, laughter turned into a loaded silence, and without saying a word, James leaned in and kissed me. My mind reeled. 1,000 thoughts flashed through my head. Images of Michael at home, our shared dreams, our arguments, my dissatisfaction, my longing for something more. But in that fleeting moment, I kissed James back. It was a tiny betrayal, yet monumental in its significance. I pulled away quickly, tears stinging my eyes as guilt consumed me. James apologized, and I shook my head, trying to catch my breath. I mumbled something about needing to go to my room. He asked if I was okay, and all I could do was nod, numb, feeling like my body and mind had somehow become strangers to one another. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Michael's face and felt this sickening guilt in the pit of my stomach. But I also couldn't shake the memory of that kiss, the rush of adrenaline, the sense that I was alive in a way I hadn't been for a long time. A part of me wanted to text James, to talk about what happened, to see if it could just be labeled a mistake and forgotten. Another part of me wanted to run away from the entire situation. In the end, I did nothing except stare at the ceiling, tortured by my conflicting emotions. The next morning, I left the conference earlier than planned and flew home. I told my boss I had a family emergency, which was a lie. I just couldn't face James or my colleagues. Michael picked me up from the airport, and I remember feeling so detached, so wrong. He was exhausted from work and barely asked about my trip. I was grateful, in a twisted way, because I didn't have the energy to pretend everything was fine. Over the next few days, I fell into a pattern of avoidance. I avoided talking to Michael about anything meaningful, avoided answering James's texts beyond superficial work-related messages. I was caught in a limbo, torn between my love for Michael, my guilt over what I had done, and the undeniable pull I felt toward James. A couple of weeks later, James and I ended up on a conference call together with some clients. Hearing his voice awakened all those confused emotions again. After the call, he sent me a message. "We need to talk about what happened." My heart pounded. I knew he was right. The next day, I found myself at a cafe near my office, sitting across from James, my fingers trembling around my latte cup. He apologized for the kiss, told me he never wanted to cause trouble in my relationship. I struggled to find the right words. I tried to explain how lonely I felt, how I was craving some spark that had faded in my life with Michael. We looked at each other for what felt like an eternity. Then he said he understood and wouldn't push me to do anything I wasn't comfortable with. But he also admitted he couldn't deny his feelings for me. That conversation should have been the point where I put a firm boundary in place. Instead, it became the gateway to something far more complicated. We agreed to keep it professional, to step back from anything personal. But somehow, within a few days, our text messages turned flirty again. We began stealing moments for ourselves, grabbing quick coffees, walking together after work, confiding in each other about stresses that weighed on us. Each small step felt like it was pushing me further down a path I knew was wrong. Yet I kept walking it. For the first time in a long while, I felt desired, understood, and yes, wanted. My rational mind told me this was a slippery slope, but my heart refused to listen. I justified it all by telling myself that Michael and I were practically on the brink of collapse anyway. That we had grown so far apart that my indiscretions didn't matter as much. I told myself that I deserved happiness, that I was simply exploring the emotional connection I was missing at home. These justifications were flimsy, but at the time, they seemed enough to quell my guilt, at least momentarily. I wish I could say that the affair, yes, by then, it was an affair, didn't escalate further. But it did. A few months after that conference, I had to visit New York again for a client pitch. James happened to be there. We met for dinner, determined to keep it casual, to maintain our distance. Yet a bottle of wine later, we found ourselves stumbling into his hotel room. I remember every second of that night, as if it's seared into my memory. The sense of surrender, the way guilt and excitement swirled together into something overpowering, the warmth of his hands against my skin. It was a betrayal that went beyond a single kiss. It was the moment I knowingly and willingly crossed a line from which I couldn't return. The morning after, I woke up in James's bed, the harsh reality crashing over me like a tidal wave. My phone had multiple missed calls from Michael, plus a slew of texts asking if everything was okay. Panic gripped me. I dressed in a daze, my heart thundering in my chest. James tried to talk, to say something reassuring, but I could barely meet his gaze. My mind screamed that I was the world's worst person, a liar, a cheat. Yet beneath it all, a spark of twisted desire lingered, the memory of how alive I had felt mere hours earlier. I left the hotel room in a haze, tears threatening to spill as I took the elevator down to the lobby. When I got back home, I was a mess of emotions. Shame, guilt, longing, confusion. Facing Michael became torture. Every time he looked at me with those warm eyes, every time he tried to ask about my trip, I felt like I was choking on my own lies. He had no idea, and part of me wanted to confess just to unburden myself, but I also feared losing him, feared the fallout. What if he left me? What if I had to face the consequences of what I'd done? I convinced myself I was protecting him by keeping it a secret. I became irritable, snapping over small things just to pick fights, so I'd have an excuse to retreat into silence. Despite my inner turmoil, I continued seeing James. The secrecy was exhilarating in a perverse way. We'd meet in out-of-the-way cafes, slip into a bar where no one would recognize us, or plan work trips that coincidentally overlapped. Every stolen moment was charged with the knowledge that what we were doing was wrong. But the more I indulged, the more difficult it became to turn back. James was never pushy, never demanding that I leave Michael. He seemed content with this in-between status, or at least, he never said otherwise. We were living in a fantasy bubble, one that didn't exist in the light of day, one we both knew couldn't last forever. The cracks in my life widened. Amy, my best friend, started noticing something was off. She confronted me one afternoon, asking why I seemed so distant and secretive. I couldn't bear to tell her, so I fed her half-truths about stress at work, about Michael and I having arguments. She looked at me with worried eyes, saying she was there for me if I needed to talk. I almost broke down right then and there, the weight of this secret pressing down on my chest. But I kept it in. Michael, for his part, was becoming increasingly frustrated. He sensed my detachment, my unwillingness to engage in our relationship. We argued frequently, sometimes yelling at each other in the heat of anger, sometimes resorting to icy silence. At times, he'd try to fix things. He'd propose a date night or suggest we take a weekend trip. But I often brushed him off, claiming I was too busy or too tired. Deep inside, I was overwhelmed by guilt, anger at myself, but also a strange resentment toward him for not being the partner I wanted him to be. It was twisted logic, but that's where my mind was. I blamed him for my feelings of loneliness, for pushing me into James's arms, even though I knew that was a cop-out. The tension built to a tipping point one night when Michael found a hotel receipt in my purse. I had been careless, leaving a piece of paper from one of my secret meetups with James. Michael confronted me, his eyes filled with hurt and confusion. I panicked. I lied. I said it was for my trip to New York for work, that the company had messed up our expense forms, that it must have ended up in my bag. He looked at me for a long moment, his gaze searching for any sign of untruth. My heart pounded so loudly that I thought he might hear it. Eventually, he sighed, gave a small nod, and let it drop. I remember rushing to the bathroom after, locking the door, and sinking to the floor in relief, tears burning my cheeks. But the close calls didn't stop there. Another time, I was texting James late at night, and Michael walked into the living room. I hastily set my phone down, face down, and forced a smile. The tension in the room was palpable. Our intimacy had deteriorated to a bare minimum. Even when Michael tried to be close to me, I felt myself recoil, my mind plagued by the knowledge of what I was doing behind his back. Meanwhile, my relationship with James grew more intense. He started saying things like, "I can't stop thinking about you," or "I wish we didn't have to hide." A part of me wanted to run away with him, to discard all the shame and start a new life. But I was too cowardly. I couldn't imagine explaining it to my family, to my friends. I couldn't face Michael's heartbreak. So I continued the charade, juggling two worlds that were bound to collide. Eventually, the inevitable happened. Michael found a text on my phone from James that left no room for misinterpretation. I had been careless. Maybe subconsciously, I wanted to get caught, to force everything into the open. It was late at night. I was in bed, half asleep, and Michael grabbed my phone from the nightstand to check the time. The screen lit up with a message. "I miss you so much. Wish you were here with me." My phone wasn't locked. Michael read it. He shook me awake, voice trembling, demanded an explanation. I stared at him, my heart pounding like a wild drum, my mouth dry. 1,000 lies raced through my mind, but I knew there was no escape. He had the proof right in front of him. What followed was an explosion of anger, shock, and tears. Michael shouted that he knew something was going on, that he had sensed I was hiding something. He demanded to know how long, who it was, every detail. In that horrible, gut-wrenching moment, I could see my entire world crumbling. I cried, begged for forgiveness, tried to explain that I was lonely, that I never meant to hurt him. But my words were just that. Words. The damage was done. He left that night, slamming the door behind him. I slid to the floor, my whole body shaking, unable to comprehend what I had done to the person I once claimed to love with all my heart. In the days that followed, I tried to contact Michael, but he wouldn't return my calls or texts. He stayed with a friend, according to a mutual acquaintance. Amy, furious and hurt, demanded the full story after she got a call from Michael, who was sobbing into the phone. I was left alone in our apartment, haunted by memories of happier times, staring at pictures of us laughing at the beach or wearing silly hats at a New Year's party. Each memory felt like a knife twisting deeper into my conscience. James reached out, concerned, telling me he felt responsible, but I couldn't even face him. I blamed him, blamed myself, blamed the world. My job performance plummeted. I was showing up late, making mistakes, forgetting deadlines. My boss started asking if everything was okay. I forced a smile, lied through my teeth that I was just dealing with some personal stress. If only she knew. Michael finally agreed to meet me at a park near our apartment. The conversation was brutal. He asked me if I was in love with James, if I wanted to be with him. I couldn't answer. I told him that the affair had made me realize how unfulfilled I felt, but that I never intended to tear our relationship apart. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and asked, "Then, why did you do it?" The question hung in the air, echoing my own thoughts. Why? Because I was lonely? Because I was seeking excitement? Because I felt like Michael had put his career above us? None of those reasons felt sufficient to excuse the pain I'd caused. He told me he didn't think he could ever trust me again. Said that every time he looked at me, he'd remember how I betrayed him. I pleaded, told him we could try therapy, that I would do anything to fix it. But Michael was resolute. He said he needed time away from me, from our apartment, from the life we had built. I watched him walk away, my entire body shaking with sobs, knowing that I had created this chasm with my own actions. In the weeks that followed, I spiraled. James attempted to be a source of comfort, but I resented him for being part of this mess. I knew I was equally to blame, if not more so. I kept replaying every moment, every choice that had led me here. Guilt gnawed at me day and night. I hardly ate, hardly slept. I started avoiding James's calls too. It was like I was drowning in a sea of my own making. I wanted to go back in time, to undo every decision, but life doesn't work that way. One day, I came home from work to find Michael at the apartment with boxes, packing up his things. He didn't say much, just quietly went about gathering his clothes, his books, his favorite mug. I stood there, tears rolling down my face, watching the man I loved leave. Before walking out, he turned to me and said, "I hope you find what you're looking for, Haley." Then he closed the door behind him, and I swear my heart shattered all over again. I felt utterly alone in the aftermath. Amy was furious with me, though she still offered a shoulder to cry on. She just didn't understand how I could have done this to Michael. Honestly, I didn't understand it myself. I felt like a monster, like the worst version of myself. Work became my only escape, though my performance was shaky. I ignored James, who kept reaching out, offering comfort, or maybe hoping we could be together now that my relationship with Michael was over. But I wasn't ready to make sense of any of it. I was too consumed by the guilt and regret. My parents found out in a roundabout way. My mom called one night, and I broke down, confessing everything. She was shocked, disappointed, and I could hear the heartbreak in her voice. She told me she still loved me, but that I needed to take a hard look at my life and figure out what I wanted. That was the problem. I had no clue what I wanted anymore. Everything felt tainted. I moved out of the apartment, mostly because I couldn't handle the memories echoing in those walls. I found a tiny studio in the same neighborhood, living among boxes I never fully unpacked. Nights were the worst. I'd stare at the ceiling, remembering the nights I spent with James, comparing them to the love and comfort I once shared with Michael. Neither gave me solace. Both reminded me of what I'd lost. James tried to convince me that we could move forward together, that we could build a relationship from the ashes. But every time I saw him, I remembered the pain in Michael's eyes when he discovered our betrayal. I couldn't separate my feelings for James from the guilt that weighed on me. Eventually, I told him we had to stop seeing each other, that I needed to be alone. He was upset, but accepted my decision. And just like that, what started as an emotional spark turned into a scorched earth that left nothing but wreckage behind. It's been months since then, and I'm still picking up the pieces. Michael has gone no contact with me, which I understand. Sometimes I see pictures of him on social media. He looks healthier, happier, like he's moving on with his life. Amy and I are on speaking terms again, though our friendship still has an unspoken tension. My parents visit me occasionally, gently encouraging me to figure out my next steps. Professionally, I'm doing better. I realized I needed to focus on something productive, so I poured myself into work. I got a promotion, ironically for the same creativity that led me to cross paths with James in the first place. Yet my personal life feels like a minefield. I'm terrified of starting anything new, terrified of repeating the same mistakes. I've tried therapy, and it's helped me unpack some of the reasons behind my actions. My fear of abandonment, my hunger for validation, my struggle to communicate my needs. It hasn't been easy, peeling back layer after layer of my own insecurities and flaws. Sometimes I leave my therapy sessions feeling like I've been turned inside out, vulnerable to the world. But I keep going, hoping that eventually I'll come to terms with what I did and find a path to forgiveness, both from myself and from the people I hurt. Sitting here now, typing this all out for the Reddit universe, I still feel a pang of defensiveness. A part of me wants to shout that I wasn't the only one to blame, that Michael neglected me, that we both contributed to the rift in our relationship. But the honest truth is that I chose to cheat. I chose deception over communication. I chose escapism over confronting our issues head-on. No matter how I try to spin it, I crossed a line that I can't uncross. And yes, it's true. I've been reluctant to fully own up to that with Michael. I've danced around it, tried to justify it, but I know, deep down, that I betrayed him in a way that may never be forgiven. People might read this and judge me, call me names, say I'm getting what I deserve. And maybe they're right. I'm sharing this not for sympathy, but because I can't keep carrying it silently. This secret, this weight has consumed me, and I need to lay it out in the open. Maybe someone out there will read this and see a reflection of themselves. Or maybe they'll see a warning of what happens when you let loneliness, resentment, and fear guide your choices. If you're in a relationship and you're feeling that distance, talk about it. Don't push it down. Don't look elsewhere for fulfillment, because the cost is far higher than you can imagine. Even now, I wish I could pick up the phone and call Michael, just to tell him one more time that I'm sorry. But I know that might not be welcomed. If he ever reads this, I want him to know I never stopped loving him, in my own messed up way. And to James, who might also see this, I'm sorry I dragged you into something so destructive. I hope you find someone who can love you without all the lies and the hidden baggage. As for me, I'm learning to live with the consequences. I'm learning to find value in myself that doesn't depend on the adoration or validation from someone else. It's an uphill battle. Some days I feel like I'm making progress. Other days, I'm buried by regret. But I'm still here, still breathing, still facing the aftermath of my own decisions. I've lost friendships, lost trust, lost the man who once was my best friend. And in return, I've gained a harsh, humbling clarity about who I am and what I need to change. I don't know where life will take me next. Maybe I'll move away from this city, start fresh somewhere else. Maybe I'll stay here, determined to fix what I can and build a new life from the rubble. What I do know is that cheating didn't solve anything. It didn't magically fill the emptiness I felt. It only created more pain. If anyone reading this is teetering on the brink of a similar choice, I hope my story makes you think twice. The adrenaline rush of an affair is fleeting, but the wreckage it leaves behind can last a lifetime. So that's it. That's my confession, my story of heartbreak and betrayal told in one unvarnished piece, laid bare for strangers to read and judge. I wish it were a neat narrative with a satisfying resolution, but it's not. Real life doesn't wrap up that way. It's messy, complicated, and sometimes downright painful. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just trying to finally be honest about what happened, about why it happened, about the fact that, despite all my denial and rationalization, I made this choice. And I have to live with it. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. I'm sure there will be a multitude of opinions on what I've done, and I accept that. This is my reality now. This is the story of a girl who wanted more and ended up losing almost everything she already had. Maybe someday, I'll heal enough to forgive myself. Until then, I'll keep working, keep facing the mirror, and keep trying to become someone I can be proud of again.